Ujjwal Sharma is a compiler's hacker at Igalia. He is also working on TC39 standardization committee for Javascript, V8 and Node.js Core, Collaborator, a TC39 Delegate and an international speaker. Originally, Ujjwal is from India, where he studied computer science at Jaypee Institute of Information Technology, Noida. He now lives in Spain, but he can tell a lot of interesting things about IT in India.
The local industry in India is quite interesting. I mean, there's almost three big camps that you can divide, like the tech sector in India. There is, or maybe four, but anyway, like there's the traditional consulting of sorts, like business. So there's like the big Indian like outsourcing companies, right? Like they pick up a lot of business from anyone and everyone in the world. Uh, their specialty is that they're very cheap and they provide like extremely cheap English speaking staff to you. So basically, like if you're a company like I don't know, electricity company in the US, you don't have a lot of money for your IT department, or maybe you want to like cut costs and make more profits. You outsource all your work to these companies, and like they would do everything you'd ask them to. They would hire engineers in India, pay them a lot less, so that way they can get away with murder, basically. And so you're moving your own IT office, like an IT office that is obviously not the core of your business. It's just something you need to keep the IT part of your business going, and you forget about it, right? Like you give it away to these companies. They have a good track record, more or less, among international clients. I don't know, TCS, Infosys, Wipro, all of these huge companies. They hire like at least before a lot of this economic crisis stuff started happening. And I can imagine like now their clients are moving away, not because they are moving away to somebody else, but just maybe they don't have enough money to keep paying. But without all of that, like these companies would easily hire like I don't know, half of all engineering graduates in India. And if you like know the situation with engineering universities in India and like engineering in general in India, that's like a lot of people, right? So a lot of people at any time are studying engineering in India, and a lot of them will be hired by these companies. So it's a very interesting point of view towards tech, especially from like a European or like a sort of Western point of view, if you will, that where we tend to think of programmers as generally like high skilled and highly paid professionals, like in most of the world. There are these parts where like the supply demand uh, equation is completely flipped, and so engineers, like especially low skilled engineers, have a completely different situation in India. Uh, on Then there's a few other parts of this industry now. So there's obviously a huge like bubbling growth of uh, in some cases innovative, in some cases not so innovative startups in India. So yeah, a lot of these startups are starting to expand their teams, maybe in some cases even more than 50, 100 engineers, which I mean, again, like from a European or American point of view, this can be huge, right? Like for a startup to have more than 10 engineers, even if it's like a tech heavy startup, it can sound like a lot, but I mean, yeah, the economics in India kind of allow you to do that. So there's a lot of these startups which have sort of intermediate to high skilled programmers that they hire. They are trying in many cases to replicate a lot of sort of the products that exist in other countries. Like I don't know, Yandex Seats. There's an alternative to that. There's an alternative to basically every sort of major product that exists, software product, right? Because here now you have the ability to hire just a bunch of programmers and recreate anything from scratch. and so that's cool. Like they innovate sometimes. Like I think about some of the aspects like fintech, for example. It's really growing fast, and you know, it's a good industry right now because of these tiny startups who are really innovating. There's things like groceries delivery, or all of these things. Like they require a lot of tool chain work with software like being done behind the scenes. So yeah, that's a whole like different systems uh, a different side of the tech industry here. The thing is like what can really, in my opinion, obviously, like I'm now just blabbering on about my subjective opinion, but I think that the biggest sort of switch that happens for a lot of these startups is when you can like because India, if you think about it in terms of like market and economics, India is a huge market, and now it's basically stupid at the global scale if you're any like big business or startup even, and you're not targeting India in any way. So yeah, maybe you're like very specific to one country, but if you're planning to go international, you have some strategy for India, right? So for example, like Amazon, you cannot beat Amazon in India because Amazon knows that they will do whatever is necessary to succeed in India because it's a huge market, same as Google or as Facebook. So I feel like in many cases, when these uh, big startups, or like at least aspiring startups, succeed, it is when they can make a kind of innovation that is specific to India, and like they can provide something that they know that Indians need or prefer, that the other company just cannot. And like, for example, in the case of uh, e-commerce, it is obviously like this cannot stop your competitors from also doing that, which is the funniest part of this. Like, for an example, in e-commerce, Amazon tried for years to make a market in India and couldn't. Like the regional marketplaces and the shops were out competing Amazon because people prefer to go to the shop, until a local startup created this innovation, if you will, of cash and delivery. Well, you can order things and we would accept cash from you. Like, this obviously makes it more expensive, more tedious to actually work, because now you have like these new processes of how to collect cash from these delivery people and so on. But ultimately they realized that a lot of people in India were not going to buy stuff unless they could actually get it and then pay. And so that really like incentivized people buying online. And well, now Amazon does it as well, and they crushed the competition. But at least like they flipped the switch, right? Like, and so there's a lot of these things that can happen, like that can make it so that suddenly people are more inclined to use these products. And so this is how you might make an edge. But again, like the global companies are in the arena now, so it's very hard for a lot of these startups, right? The third category, I would say, is just like big tech, which I already alluded to, right? Like now, I mean, I don't remember at what point, maybe 20, 30 years ago, the situation was different. But now definitely like India is not a market which is not on somebody's radar, right? So if you think about Amazon, if you think about Samsung or Google, whatever, they have huge sort of offices in India. And in cases of many, like, I don't know, Microsoft probably still has mostly support here. So, I mean, that's kind of not fun, I guess. But a lot of them, like Google or Amazon, do a lot of their important work in India. Like one of the funniest things, well, funny in some aspects, one of the most interesting things that when I went to my first conferences in Berlin, we like in JSConf, we had a session in the Amazon office in Berlin, and like the cheesy office design thing that they do like at HR, and it's like the different clocks of the big few offices in the main room, and one of the clocks was like Bangalore, and so I was like very interested. It's like, okay, they are actually in the top 5 offices or so. Bangalore is one of them. Now, a few years in, and this is already not surprising anymore, right? Like I was recently back home in India and talking to a friend who works at at Samsung Research, and they were telling me how a lot of their software work as well as hardware work now moves on to India, right? Like obviously some of the most like central teams work out of Korea, but a lot of the heavy lifting is now happening in offices, various offices across India. So this is like the third category, in my opinion, like big tech. Basically, the strategy of big tech is when it comes to talent, they need to outpay both of these companies, right? Like the startups as well as the mainstream Indian companies, they're never going to pay the same amount of money for various reasons as these big tech companies can. And then if you see from their point of view, they still have a full-time employee who converses well in English and is a good engineer, all things considered, because they have a much more they have a much higher bar than both of these, if you think generally, right, for their employees. And they're still saving money as opposed to hiring somebody similar in the UK or the US or anywhere else, right? So that's the third category. I think that is an important category, especially for like computer science students and generally engineers. Like this is ideally the kind of category that a lot of them aspire to be in. Like I remember during my initial years in university, a lot of people really had their sights set on Amazon, for example, like just the one company. But generally, I feel that most people want to be somewhere here, right? Because there's a clear growth arc. There's many things that you can do, move outside. I mean, that kind of makes it so that the company now no longer saves money with you. But I mean, if you can prove that you're a very reliable employee, maybe they'll be happy to send you off somewhere. And yeah, like a lot of opportunities open up for you, right? Like a lot of people I know have been in sort of this part of the industry, and then when they gain a lot of experience, they can directly apply for like leadership or managerial roles in the big startups, right? So you work in Google for a couple of years, and then you're a VP or a CTO of some startup. When I was talking about the three categories, I mentioned there was a fourth, but now I kind of don't remember what I wanted the fourth to be.
Maybe for something for government, or no?
I guess like the government, yeah, also has a lot of people working in it, but I mean that is sort of a whole different area. The government is in many ways outdated, right? Like it has exams and stuff for people to sort of get in, and then like the technology arc is just so slow that it doesn't quite work out. But yeah, now there's a sort of growing number of contractors. So I guess they also work for the government in many cases. Like the government contracts, subcontracts, if you will, a lot of their work out to just private contractors. And a lot of these contractors are like, are basically living as digital nomads, where like they may pick up huge projects from inside India or elsewhere and just like, work out of their laptop bag, and just like, it's yeah, that's basically the fourth category. And it's not just even limited to people who are sort of from an Indian background, or just like, have studied in India. A lot of people I know these days have even moved from like other countries to India and like just work remotely and it's a pretty cheap country to do that.
What is an average salary of a programmer in India?
200,000. Okay, yeah, so it's like two and a half thousand euros, maybe two and a half, $3,000 a year. And yeah, I mean, you could have imagined it's pretty low. It's a starting salary at some of the sort of worse places when you think about like giving a good salary or about caring for their employees. But I do feel like a lot of people who end up being sort of subjected to such roles, if for the lack of a better word, because obviously like you need to start your career somewhere. And I feel that people are more worried about gaps in their resume, like you finish university and you cannot really find another job. So instead of like just like what's common in Europe or elsewhere, where people would just say, I'm going to take a break and do something with myself, right? Like build on my skills or get a better job. People would rather get this job and like, put the bare minimum in it. Whereas the goal for them is to actually like do something else, to either make a startup or to get work at a startup, or just like to improve their skills and get in an interview elsewhere, or in some cases even like postgraduate studies, right? So something that's even worse is that a lot of these companies now, like a lot of these companies that really don't pay all that well, are now starting increasingly to ask these employees to to sign off on a bond or like a contract where they're bound to work for this company for whatever years, right? Like, and it's kind of really really sad. I mean, from a workers' rights perspective, you're basically forced to work at this place for a certain amount of time, or you have to get out of this contract by paying a bunch of money to the company. And the idea is that these companies claim that like the 6 month or whatever long training that they have is actually something people exploit, right? And like people would come in for a job and spend the 6 months training period training with them and then leave. So yeah, I mean that's sort of the tail end of the spectrum. So it's like you can feel terrible about it, but I'm feeling over time that, I mean, yes, as tech in general, or like IT or programming and software become fields with more and more people sort of interested in making career, this is bound to happen eventually, right? Like we're gonna hit the supply demand curve, and obviously like a lot of these people in some situations you can understand that they need the 6 month training period, for example, whereas like they might have finished a degree in computer science but do not actually have the real world skills to make an impact on a real world project. Like even from the point of view of these companies, like even if they are hiring these graduates, because they're hiring such low skilled graduates, they essentially have to retrain them from scratch. uh, so that's kind of the trade-off they're making. Now obviously, like if you have enough skills to like actually stand your ground in an interview, you could get into one of these startups which care a lot more about like your actual programming skills than say how well you do on a test, how well you do on just an interview that might have nothing to do with the ground realities of application development. So that is where I feel the salaries start to go like 5-6 times of this that we talked about, uh, and so sort of in a better range, right? Like in a livable range, you can actually be in one of the major cities and have a decently comfortable life. And then obviously like the big tech salaries would double even that, right? So it's like around 10 times of the 2000 figure that I gave, or 2500. So that starts getting in the comfortable range. Like obviously 30 or even $35,000 is not a lot by international standards, but by Indian standards, it's a pretty good salary. So it's it's way higher than the median. You can live in basically any city, do basically what you want. So that's the kind of ranges we're talking about. Although, yes, there is maybe not effectively, but practically, there is a hard cap when talking about tech salaries in India. Like you cannot get the same kind of tech salaries like you get in some parts of Europe or in the West Coast US uh, in India. And I mean, it would be a bit ridiculous if you did. There was a fun period of time when I worked full time for Igalia and lived in India. So there was a time when I did, and it's just OP. It's like, and not, uh, something that's going to happen across the board unless, something really different happens. I mean,
Which cities in India have the most developed IT?
I think in terms of India, it will have to be Bangalore. Like Bangalore is uh, now obviously there is competition, and like being from Delhi NCR, I always sort of prefer Delhi over many things. But yeah, there's no disputing that Bangalore has been a city that has been built on and around tech as like the biggest driving factor. And so, yes, like now, if you go to Bangalore, you're going to see the whole place like completely taken over by tech, kind of like the Bay Area in the US, where like yes, you can find regular people and like regular businesses in the Bay Area, but it's definitely not like what everybody's talking about or thinking about, right? So Bangalore in this way has become a very like multicultural city with a lot of tech cities, a lot of tech companies, offices, personalities, events, communities, all of this, right? There's obvious downsides. Like before this huge like tech boom, Bangalore was not on the map, even in some ways you could say. So it is a city that has to like really adapt to this huge influx of people. So yeah, like from what I hear, like infrastructure wise, it's very challenged. Like when it comes to traffic or water or anything, like Bangalore is being pushed to its limits. But I hope that with a lot of this money and like, through taxes maybe, or just like, a lot of this investment coming in, that Bangalore will fix its infrastructure issues. But it's definitely a huge company that's a huge city. I keep interchanging these. Huge city that is like boomed with tech, and like now it's tech in every corner of the city.